of the project Net Commons. I am today chairing the second session of the day on regulation. The title is Integration of the Commons into the Regulation and the Legislation Framework with infrastructure sharing, European Directive cost reduction. So during this session we are going to have 4 presentations, and after that we're going to have half an hour of discussion. So the first speaker is Félix Tréguer, also a researcher at CNRS and a team member of the project Net Commons. And Félix is going to present a panorama of the legal issues which are facing community networks.
Sí. Okay. Full screen. Thank you. Hola a todas y todos. Es un placer estar aquí. No estaré capaz de seguir en castellano, así que voy a cambiar por inglés. Since I have the honor and the pleasure of starting this panel, I thought I would give a quick overview. Can you hear me? Because I'm a bit far from the mic. No, it's okay. A quick overview of some of the regulatory issues faced by community networks across Europe. It will be based on a survey I conducted almost 2 years ago, so it might not be fully up to date or exhaustive, but I think it would be a good picture. It was for an article I wrote with Primavera de Filippi called Expanding the Internet Commons, and we looked at political and legal issues related to community networks. So I'll start by observing or talking about some of the regulatory hurdles faced by community networks before looking at potential solutions. So first, we can observe that in spite of their potential for fostering public interest goals attached to broadband policy in general, usually community networks have remained below the radar of policymakers and regulators, which tend to mostly consider the needs of big incumbent players in the field. I'll give 2 examples. The first is the exclusion of community networks from public networks rolled out thanks to taxpayers' money. The most striking example, so these public networks are often built and managed by a private company, contracted by the public authorities that paid for the network. And then the company managing the network leases access to traditional internet access providers. And the issue that community networks face in trying to access these networks is related to the fact that usually the prices charged by the managing company are far too high. They're designed for big commercial players and are far too high for small players who only have dozens, maybe hundreds, maybe a few thousands subscribers that they can reach through those pipes. And this was reported in particular by French community networks who have been unable to afford these fees charged by the companies in charge of the public network. They've been denied access on a preferential basis and faced issues related to transparency. For instance, in one case, the network operator managing the public network refused to communicate the price listing to the community network that wanted to know how much it would cost them to access that network. In a neighboring country, France, which I won't name, a community network similarly underlined the lack of collaboration with public administrations in securing access to landline infrastructure. A second problem is tied to short-term policies and what economists often call regulatory capture. The fact that regulators and policymakers listen to and serve those who they are supposed to regulate, and those who have the resources to develop full-fledged lobbying strategies. One good example in that field is the field of spectrum management. so the airwaves that we use to communicate wirelessly. In France, for instance, and I'll give many examples involving France because it's the country I know the most. In France, so back in 2007, it was proposed to use part of the digital dividend, so airwaves that used to be used for analog TV and radio, to use this digital dividend to develop mobile television as well as digital radio. So two services, two technologies that have not taken up. And the remaining half of the golden frequencies of this UHF band with a very good propagation features were then auctioned off to the telecom operators for 4G networks. And so, of course, this created a lot of money, or brought a lot of money to the state, but it's money that consumers, subscribers in the end will pay back to these, the licensees. And in this whole policy process, one outcome or one policy orientation was never fully considered, is that of extending unlicensed access to spectrum. Unlicensed access to spectrum is the fact that the legal regime applicable to Wi-Fi frequencies, for instance, which means actually turning the airwaves into what they are, that is a commons for all to use. Wi-Fi, back in the late 90s, developed when regulators thought that they could use what at the time were called junk bands, so like airwaves that nobody thought were interesting to develop services and new technologies. But I mean, that led to the development of Wi-Fi, which of course is a big success. And this is all the more troubling and sad given the fact that current Wi-Fi bands, which are often used by wireless community networks, relying on Wi-Fi networks, are often subject to congestion. This was reported by Freifunk, for instance, in Germany, where in urban areas the 5 gigabits and 2.4 gigabits bands are reaching their limits in some areas. And so it would be interesting to expand, and I will talk about that later, but expand unlicensed access to other sort of frequencies so that with better propagation characteristics, for instance, so that better, faster, cheaper networks can be deployed by community networks. So coming to potential solutions, the first would be to lift unnecessary regulatory burdens. And here I'm referring to the fact that I'm not sure, I need to check. I was asked late yesterday to make this presentation and didn't have the time to check, but when I was conducting this research, a community network based in Brussels reported that there was a fee to register as an operator to the regulatory authority in Belgium, and that fee was several hundred euros, which was too expensive for a volunteer-run organization. Of course, the registration is free in France, Italy, Spain, where the communities doing community networks are much more vivid, and so that might be a first step. Lifting these fees would be a first step, and I'm sure we can find many other such unnecessary regulatory burdens. Lifting them would be a first step in helping community networks. Second potential solution would be promoting open Wi-Fi. So several laws seek to prevent the sharing of internet connections among several users by making people responsible and liable for the communications made by the users of their communication. This is the case in France, for instance, after a 2009 copyright law, the three strikes Adopi law. I don't know if you've heard of it. Actually tried to combat peer-to-peer file sharing by introducing a tort of improperly securing one's Wi-Fi connection against unlawful activity. So the idea is that a subscriber is liable for his connection, and if someone else uses it to download or use peer-to-peer file sharing systems, the subscriber would be liable for the activity of others. And as a result, many community ISPs in France would like to establish open Wi-Fi networks in public spaces, in parks, in streets, refrain from doing so out of legal insecurity. There is a case currently pending before the European Court of Justice, the McFadden case, coming from German courts, which might soon bring useful clarifications regarding these legal regimes. So third issue or potential solution is one I already alluded to, is the expanding the spectrum commons, expanding unlicensed access to spectrum. And here it is interesting to know that in 2012 the EU Parliament and EU governments, the EU as a whole, and its lawmakers passed the EU Radio Spectrum Policy Program. And this, so it's basically a program. It's not an actual law, but it's a policy program for managing spectrum in the year to come, and that text recommend that Wi-Fi be expanded, or at least its expansion be considered by policymakers. It says that wireless access systems, including radio local area networks, may outgrow the current allocations on unlicensed spaces. So the issue of congestion we were talking about. So they were calling for an assessment of the possibility of extending the range of bands, frequency bands allocated to Wi-Fi under unlicensed or shared system or regimes. It also says that mesh networks or the member states, in cooperation with the Commission, should take full account of the shared and unlicensed use of spectrum to provide the basis for wireless mesh networks, which can play a key role in bridging the digital divide. In the US, for the past few years, you've been seeing a lot of regulatory developments on these issues with for instance, unlicensed access to white spaces, so frequency bands that are normally used by TV station, radio stations, but some parts of these bands are left unused, and the idea is to open access, unlicensed access to these bands, which propagate really far. In Europe, in spite of these amendments, which were passed almost 4 years ago, nothing has been done on the matter. And in member states, you've seen a few experimentations, but nothing very substantial, and that's an area where a lot of progress can be made. Fourth, sharing public networks. Again, that was alluded to in the first part of the talk. Networks built with taxpayers' money should be treated as commons, or at least they should remain free of corporate capture. Regulators should ensure that non-profit community networks can access publicly funded and subsidized physical infrastructures without unnecessary financial or administrative hurdles, such as the price listing was talking about. And they should review existing policy in that field to provide transparent information to map all these public networks, because it's really hard when you're a community network to know that, maybe a few kilometers away there's public fiber on the land, under the sidewalks, under the roads, and so it would be a first step to give open data or transparent information on this, and then change the legal regime to promote access by smaller players and in particular community networks. Fifth, and I'm almost done, and this relates to a more general need that or a useful change in the way policy is developed and made in the telecom sector, inviting community networks to the table. All of these policies I just talked about point to this overarching issue of the need to democratize telecom policy, to bring citizens and organizations that may be non-profit to the table. In some countries, regulators have already started doing so. In Slovenia, for instance, on one occasion, the main community network there was asked to contribute to policy discussions on a piece of telecom legislation, which ended up creating a net neutrality provision in the Slovenian law well before the EU passed a regulation on the matter 2 years ago already. In Greece, the Athens Wireless Metropolitan Network, again a major community network in Greece, was also invited by the NRA, the National Regulatory Authority, to respond to a consultation. And in France, FFDN, which is the main umbrella organization for community networks in France, has also sometimes been convened to technical meetings, but save for a few exceptions like the net neutrality provision in Slovenia, they're and then in many other countries, participants in community networks report that they're not listened to by regulators, One participant in Linux told me that the government simply do not understand who or what we are, and at the EU level, for having attended a few policy discussions there, these actors are never invited and never present at the table. And it's a shame because, we were talking about the issue of regulatory capture. They, as citizens, sometimes mostly not-for-profit organizations, they have the technical expertise, the economic expertise that could be very, very useful in countering some of the false claims or that are channeled or issued by traditional players in that field, and it could be a very useful counterpower to commercial traditional ISPs in that field. Of course, and with this, I think it also or shows the need for community networks themselves to organize and develop their capacity in advocating for new and innovative policies on these issues. But what's for sure is that we're 20 years since the beginning of the privatization of telecom sectors in Europe, and there's a long way to go to make telecom policy work more in the public interest. And community networks in the future will have a key role to play in that regard. And so as we move forward with the Net Commons project, I hope we can contribute to that dynamic and move the debate in that direction. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Felix, for this extremely clear and complete presentations. I am now going to introduce Olga Diaz, who is the head of the legal department of the Local RET Consortium. And Olga is also going to make us a presentation of the legal framework, but more specific, focusing on the regulation for public administrations.
Okay. Thank you, Melanie. Buenos días. Como ha dicho Melanie, yo soy la jefa, la responsable del área jurídica del consorcio Local Red, que es un consorcio que representa a prácticamente la totalidad de los ayuntamientos de Cataluña y las diputaciones provinciales. Esto lo explico para que se entienda el marco de mi intervención. O sea, yo voy a explicar cuál es el rol que jugarían las administraciones públicas, en concreto las locales, en un proyecto de comunes. Es más, de entrada, no definiré los posibles problemas, si los hay. Creo que esto será más práctico que surja en el debate. Yo, de momento, me centraré en definir cuál es llamémosle corsé, porque es así, es un corsé que ciñe la actividad de las administraciones públicas, como antes ha expresado David Ferrer. O sea, en un proyecto de comunes, pues una cosa es la intervención de los privados, que tiene las limitaciones que pueda tener o no las tiene, pero las administraciones públicas nos vemos sometidas a una rígida regulación por parte del Estado, porque, como ha indicado David, la competencia en materia de telecomunicaciones en España corresponde al Estado central. Esta competencia tiene una vis expansiva que se manifiesta claramente en la nueva Ley de Telecomunicaciones del año 2014, que es poco respetuosa con las competencias de las administraciones territoriales, me refiero a las autonómicas y las locales. Es decir, la ley del año 2014 pretende priorizar el despliegue de los operadores privados frente a otros posibles intereses que pueden converger en esta materia, como son la defensa de los intereses urbanísticos, medioambientales, de salud pública, etcétera, que pueden ejercer otras administraciones. Es decir, que en todo esta introducción es para situar mi intervención y dar a entender que yo voy a definir cuál es este marco. También quiero poner de manifiesto que me sabe mal que en la mesa, tal como estaba anunciado, no participen los representantes del regulador y del Ministerio de Industria, porque realmente en manos de ellos sí que está el poder interpretar la normativa o incluso modificarla. Yo, desde mi humilde posición, solo me limitaré a exponerla. Entonces, vamos a ver, ¿qué ocurre? Una administración pública, y en concreto una administración local, puede adoptar dos roles. Por un lado, puede explotar o prestar un servicio de comunicaciones electrónicas, es decir, actuar como un operador, o simplemente puedes actuar como titular del dominio público por el cual transcurren las redes de los operadores privados. Para separar estos dos ámbitos de actuación es muy importante ir a los conceptos, porque a veces los conceptos son los que nos inducen a error. ¿Cuándo una administración pública está explotando una red? Claro, en el concepto vulgar de explotación de una red hay tendencia a pensar, yo soy administración pública, he construido con recursos públicos una red de comunicaciones electrónicas y se la cedo a un operador privado para que la explote comercialmente, en sentido vulgar. Bueno, aquí el error está en que efectivamente el operador privado explota la red comercialmente, pero la administración pública, en el momento en que crea y pone a disposición su red de un operador privado, también está explotando la red. ¿Y esto qué implica? Que esta administración pública tiene que constituirse como operador privado, con todos los inconvenientes burocráticos que ello conlleva. ¿Vale? Entonces, prestar un servicio de comunicaciones electrónicas es más claro el concepto, por lo tanto, tenemos claro que una administración que explote o preste un servicio debe ser operador de telecomunicaciones, de comunicaciones electrónicas, perdón. Siguiendo con los conceptos, el que nos permite más margen pues sería el concepto de red de comunicaciones electrónicas. ¿Qué se entiende por red de comunicaciones electrónicas? Bueno, pues la Ley de Telecomunicaciones Española del año 2014 define como aquella que en su totalidad o principalmente se utiliza para la prestación de servicios de comunicaciones disponibles al público, con lo cual excluye las redes de autoprestación o redes privadas y que soporta la transferencia de señales entre puntos de terminación de la red. ¿Qué no es una red de comunicaciones electrónicas? Pues las canalizaciones, lo que sería la infraestructura de obra civil. Esto es interesante a efectos del proyecto de los proyectos de comunes, porque definirá el rol de la administración en él, tal como decía. Por lo tanto, la regulación, la normativa aplicable, pues tenemos una ley del año 2014 que está pendiente de desarrollo reglamentario en muchos aspectos. Y en tanto en cuanto no se dicte este desarrollo reglamentario, tenemos una circular del año 2010 de la Comisión del Mercado de las Telecomunicaciones, que es el organismo regulador en España, que definía las condiciones de la explotación y prestación de redes por parte de las administraciones públicas. En tanto no se oponga a la ley española, esta circular sigue en vigor. La Ley de Telecomunicaciones, ya de entrada, nos dice que para que una administración pública actúe como operador, ya la exposición de motivos hace una declaración de intenciones y dice que se establecen condiciones muy estrictas. Es decir, la Ley del año 2014 persigue que una administración pública tiene una clara voluntad de que las administraciones públicas no ejerzan de operadores de telecomunicaciones. Y obliga, por un lado, cuando se trata de un proyecto de autoprestación sería cuando una administración pública da servicio a sus sedes municipales para sus trabajadores municipales. Tiene que comunicárselo ahora al Ministerio de Industria, que ahora es el nuevo también regulador, digamos, pero no implica constituirse como operadores. Como he definido, ¿qué se considera autoprestación? Pues cuando es para funciones propias del personal al servicio de la administración pública. También se equiparan los centros de educación o formación reglada y a través de también se equiparan las bibliotecas, es decir, el servicio de acceso a Internet en una biblioteca se considera que no hay que ser operador para prestarlo, y por una reciente resolución de la Comisión Nacional de Mercados y Competencia también los telecentros en centros públicos. Fuera del ámbito de la autoprestación, una administración local que pretenda prestar un servicio, explotar una red o prestar un servicio de comunicaciones electrónicas, se ha de constituir como operador, y el obstáculo importante que nos impone la ley del año 2014 es que no lo puede hacer directamente, sino que lo tiene que hacer a través de una empresa especialmente constituida al efecto y que tenga este objeto social. Este obstáculo es especialmente importante en un momento de de existencia de que coexisten diferentes normativas a nivel local, que lo que pretende es precisamente una reducción del sector público, y precisamente hay como una tendencia a reducir organismos públicos, no a crearlos, y una administración pública tiene serias dificultades para crear una empresa pública que haga de operador de telecomunicaciones. La regla general es que un operador, cuando actúe, una administración cuando actúe como operador, ha de respetar el principio del inversor privado y respetar los principios de neutralidad, transparencia, no distorsión de la competencia y no discriminación, y respetar la normativa europea de ayudas de Estado. La propia ley es consciente de que existen una serie de supuestos en los que no se afecta a la competencia, y nos dice que un reglamento definirá en qué supuestos una administración local puede dar estos servicios gratuitamente sin que se considere que con esto está haciendo una competencia desleal al sector privado. También la ley se remite a supuestos y también en aquellos casos en los que haya un fallo de mercado, ¿de acuerdo? Entonces, se supone que cuando esté desarrollada la ley, en estos supuestos una administración pública podrá suplir al sector privado y prestar un servicio de comunicaciones electrónicas, un wifi público o un servicio de acceso a Internet por una red fija. El obstáculo será el hecho de tener que constituir una sociedad, como he comentado. ¿Qué otros requisitos impone la ley a estas redes de titularidad municipal? Pues dice que todos los operadores privados tendrán derecho a acceder directamente a esta red en condiciones neutrales, transparentes, equitativas y no discriminatorias. ¿De acuerdo? Esto en cuanto a la actuación de las administraciones públicas, y, como he dicho, como operadores de telecomunicaciones. ¿Cuándo podrán, además, según esta circular que he dicho que sigue en vigor hasta que no haya un desarrollo reglamentario, cuándo puede una administración, siendo operador de telecomunicaciones, prestar un servicio gratuito? Pues bueno, en un servicio de acceso a Internet limitado a páginas web de las administraciones, el de bibliotecas, como he dicho, en centros docentes donde se presten actividades educativo-culturales, y las redes wifi ciudadanas que tengan la limitación de velocidad de 256K. Por tanto, bueno, luego pondremos en relación estas limitaciones con los posibles proyectos de la Fundación Gifinet, ¿no? Y veremos si pueden existir obstáculos o no a estos proyectos conjuntos. Esto en cuanto al papel de la Administración como operador de comunicaciones electrónicas. Pero ¿qué otro rol juega una Administración pública? Pues, como he indicado, como titular del dominio público. Las redes de telecomunicaciones, de comunicaciones electrónicas, hacen un uso intensivo del dominio público. ¿Y qué nos dice la ley española? Pues que las administraciones públicas tienen la obligación de poner a disposición de los operadores este dominio público. Hasta aquí todo bien, ¿no? Y que no pueden hacerlo en condiciones, que tienen que hacerlo en condiciones neutrales, objetivas, de nuevo, equitativas y discriminatorias, y que en ningún caso atribuya un derecho preferente o exclusivo a favor de ningún operador. Y prohíbe, en este sentido, los procedimientos de licitación, es decir, prohíbe concursos que harían que sería un operador determinado el que hiciese el uso del dominio público en un determinado territorio. Lo que se pretende es que una administración pública ceda su dominio público a todos los operadores privados que lo soliciten en igualdad de condiciones. Es decir, si es con contraprestación económica, pero a todos; si es con determinadas condiciones de otras características, lo mismo, pero un trato igualitario. Esta es la premisa básica. Y otro tema interesante, esto sí que introduce la ley con el afán de facilitar el despliegue de los operadores de comunicaciones electrónicas, es, como he comentado, considerar que las infraestructuras de obra civil, lo que serían las canalizaciones, tubos, postes, no se consideran red de comunicación electrónica, sino que son infraestructuras de soporte, y una administración tiene la obligación de facilitar su acceso a los operadores privados. De nuevo, ¿cuál es el límite importantísimo que la administración pública no puede saltarse aquí? Pues que no puede hacerlo en exclusiva a favor de un operador, sea cual sea este operador, y ha de hacerlo pues en igualdad de condiciones. Y la ley lo prevé todo esto en un artículo que es el artículo 37, que contempla que la administración pública y los operadores lleguen a un acuerdo en los que renegocien las condiciones de acceso y se establezcan las compensaciones económicas a favor de la Administración si ello es necesario. En este afán centralizador de la ley, como os he dicho, se hace una remisión a un reglamento del Estado para desarrollar este precepto. Aún no se ha dictado, existe un informe de la Comisión Nacional de Mercados y Competencia, es decir, que ha existido un borrador de proyecto, pero que no ha sido público. Por lo tanto, bien, yo no sé, tengo muchas más, puedo desarrollar más el tema, pero creo que sería más interesante tratarlo en fase de debate. Yo creo que el mensaje que tengo que lanzar desde mi posición como representante a nivel jurídico del mundo local es esto, que las administraciones públicas, a propósito de una pregunta también que hacía antes un asistente, ¿no? ¿Qué implicación pueden tener las administraciones públicas en los proyectos de comunes? Bueno, siempre que se muevan en este marco legal, en este rígido corsé, pues pueden intervenir, pero tratando por ejemplo, en el caso español, pues, bueno, catalán, la Fundación Guifinet es una fundación, está constituida como operador de comunicaciones electrónicas, inscrita en el registro de la Comisión del Mercado de Telecomunicaciones, ahora Comisión Nacional de Mercados y Competencia, y por lo tanto la Administración local puede poner a disposición de la Fundación Guifinet su dominio público, yo no sé, una parcela pública, la fachada, el techo del ayuntamiento, las farolas del alumbrado público, pero lo ha de hacer en las mismas condiciones que trataría a otro operador privado. También puede poner a disposición de la Fundación Guifinet sus canalizaciones, en la medida que Guifinet es un operador, también puede poner sus canalizaciones a disposición de Guifinet, pero volvemos a lo mismo, nunca en exclusiva, siempre tratándole como a un operador, como a otro operador. Hablo de canalizaciones. Ya en el momento en que introduzcamos un elemento, aunque sea pasivo, como la fibra oscura, esto ya plantea mayor problemas, porque aquí, vuelvo a lo que os he explicado al principio, si una administración local pone a disposición de un operador privado una red de comunicaciones electrónicas, la fibra pasiva ya nos convertiría esta infraestructura en una red de comunicaciones electrónicas, ya no lo podría hacer directamente, sino que tendría que hacerlo constituyéndose previamente como operador. Aquí hay un obstáculo que establece la normativa que, bueno, pues que no nos gusta claramente, porque es un obstáculo prácticamente insalvable y carente de lógica, pero como lo que se pretende es, ya os he dicho, interponer obstáculos a la constitución de operadores públicos, pues ahí lo tenemos. Y no sé cuánto tiempo he consumido, 10, 15... ¿sí? Bueno, yo creo que es mejor, antes de seguir profundizando en posibles problemas o no, que lo tratemos en fase de debate, ¿no? O sea que yo dejaré aquí mi intervención. Gracias.
Thank you very much for your clear presentation of the obligations and conditions of the public administration. I am now going to introduce our third speaker of this session. Ramon Roca is the president of the Guifinet Foundation. Thank you.
It looks good. The picture. Okay. I'm gonna. Actually, it was very nice to have this introduction given by Olga, because very clearly explains the boundaries and the limitations that as the local administrations they are facing because of the regulatory, let's say, environment, and trying to contribute to the Net Commons project, and by the practices that we have been developing while occupying public domains. Actually, I'm going to explain something which is very simple, but we think that it's very helpful in because the original idea of what I'm going to explain is not from us. Actually, come from the local administrations in the county of Uzona. This is actually where we are mostly developed, and they were, let's say, suffering let's say the limitations that Olga was explaining, and trying to find a solution. I'm gonna try to explain what it was already exposed in some workshops in Brussels and things like that. The problem is, as a public administration, so I'm sorry because I'm from Gifinet, but again, this idea is not from Gifinet. We are supporting, and we are just trying to contribute and you know, in order to solve what's Olga was explaining about the challenges. The problem is that as a public sector, you should develop networks over your territory for Internet of Things, for managing the traffic, for installing semaphores, for multiple reasons, cameras, whatever. It is a need, no discussion on that. As a self-service in terms of public need, right? Also, as a public administration, since you cannot provide internet to the users, Olga explained it very well. I mean, you cannot be, it's a public service, it's somehow if you can imagine internet, but have not to be provided by the public administration. Also, David was explaining, has to be provided by the private sector. It's said, it's not, it has to be like that. So internet has to be provided by the private ISPs. And the thing is that a public domain, and this represents just a duct, you know, it has, you know, 12 centimeters wide. It's something limited, right, in terms of a space. And it can be translated, this analogy, both to spectrum, both to anything that has a space. It's limited at the end of the day. So problem is, okay, since the space is limited and I want all those services that I was describing, police, hospitals, transit, and also all the ISPs, not just one, all. Olga explained again very well. I think it was the 30 article, right? It says for all the ISPs, not just one. So how to manage that? Because since the space is limited, at some point you will run out of space, depending on how you are managing it. Physically, as a problem, I mean, there is no space for everybody, depending on how much space you are assigning to it. Reality, and here we are in an audience very much scientific, let's say, from the academic. So, yeah, physically it looks like the space is limited, but there is a trick here. Electronic, if we don't look from the perspective from the physical, but from the capabilities in terms of what's capable for transporting information to point A to point B, what we realize is that by just using 9 micrometers, which is less than a hair, we can transport almost all the internet that we need for the whole country or even for all Europe. Hundreds of gigabytes. So it's about efficiency because we don't need more. It's a single fiber optic by multiplexing in 128 channels, 10 gigs. That was not possible. It was possible 5 years ago, but was too much expensive. But today is something affordable, even for the community wireless networks like us. So technology is evolving and is giving a lot of more opportunities. And actually what's needed is not 12 centimeters, but 9 micros. So it's a matter of managing this asset properly and can do the magic. We never have to, I mean, if there is a duct, to construct another duct because there is not enough space. It's just about reusing the space in the proper way, which, by the way, is something that is being asked for the European Commission through the Directive of 2061-2014. It's about cost reduction, efficiency of using all public infrastructures. So that can be suitable for next generation infrastructures, right? So there is a solution. That's the science, contribution. And the point, oh, sorry, I get... One of the solutions that can help is then, if we force in another usage of, I said, self-service for public administrations, private ISPs, they have to be there by law, everybody. So it's not denying that. But simply, and just because of actually following the law. I mean, there is a different usage, which is not the private, which is the one we have. And we are entitled to do so. We are registered at whatever. And it's a different usage. And the commons, by definition, we share all infrastructure, even with the privates, right? So if the privates don't want, they are not forced, as long as there is a space. But if there is no space, they can still use our space, because we, as in commons and the governance explained it before, we provide same conditions for all, not just for our friends. Private sectors do. Myself, as a private, if I am not forced, I can make an agreement with you, but not with you because of economic interest, of a strategy, commercial strategy, whatever. But myself, as a foundation, we cannot. And we are enforced by law and by the bylaws actually coming from the foundation, right? So by enabling, you can call it commons, you can also call it shared. I mean, just not to identify in a single process, because it's not about forcing a single process, but to ensure that at least there is some space that is shared, and then enables the magic that there is no need for construct any more dots. So that's the idea. I think it's understood because it's quite simple concept and very magic, right? So at the end of the day is how the administrations could do what Olga was presenting before. I mean, have a space for all without exclusions, both self-service, private, and everything. So a quite simple mechanism can be done for that. So it's about whatever unit, physical unit we were talking about, passive, whatever, we can, DACT is a very good example, right? So there is a space, so let's use that space in a way that no one is taking all the space at the same time, but the space that they need. In a kind of first asked, first served, so we are not interfering. If somebody wants us, if there is some taxes that apply, of course they apply, I mean, same taxes for all. And not forcing, because what's difficult for a public administration perspective is to enforce a specific business model. Maybe privates don't like to become part of the commons ecosystem. And maybe in our case, the same thing in the other way. So let's not force anything. But one important thing, ensure that they use what they are asking for. So not, not hugging all the space just because of whatever provision or technical reason that from the academia one explained very well that by governance, by applying technology and so on, there is no objective need for taking all the space just for a single player, right? So, and ensuring something very simple that can be enforced. That actually there is a paper, I think was translated to English with the ordinance. There are some drafts already circulating and in public consultation with several experts on that. So ensuring just one simple thing, that at least there is one space before it gets exhausted that is going to be managed in a shared way. The minimum space, whatever. If we're talking about several ducts, one duct. If it was single duct, maybe one camisa, how is said camisa, subconduct. Whatever, it can be defined. We don't have to go, fortunately, to the 9 micrometers unit. I mean, it is much easier, actually, right? So just ensuring that before gets exhausted, not before gets exhausted, not from the very beginning, because maybe you are forcing things that makes the things more expensive, just because forcing, use subconducts where there is no need because nobody else is going to use that. So just at the time that is required, at least there is a space to be used in a shared basis, and for instance by the commons. So when we come into the picture, it doesn't happen, actually what's happening now, oh, I'm sorry, you are the last one, so there is no more space for you. It's already taken by someone, right? And then actually it's a problem also for the administrations, because they are supposed to provide a space for everyone. So that's it. In terms of a very simple illustration also to explain that is when if you know the fibers cables do carry hundreds of dozens or hundreds of fibers, and they are grouped in tubes. So we can use whatever unit in this particular. So it can be conducts, ducts, whatever. Just reserve some of them, and force some of them to be shared, just in case that they got exhausted. So how local administrations can help within, still following the European directives and local regulations and so on. It's about, by the way, this is called universal format. So it's a kind of whatever you do as a public administrations, because you are constructing roads, you are whatever, streets from the local administration. So is what David was referring with Maytel, right? Ensuring that they are capable for supporting next generation networks. That's the obligation, and stops there somehow. So without stopping there, but for ensuring that will be enough and will be not just forcing that the assignment of the criteria assignment of those spaces will be following this principle. So will be a space for all before it gets exhausted, right? And then at the end of the day, we're following EU directives and principles. We're preventing, which is the most important thing, because actually we have seen on the many, while participating in the workshops in Brussels, that actually was getting one of the concern. I mean, money coming from the people in Europe, or public assets being spent in overbuilding. So there is a need for providing broadband to everybody, but we are realizing that in some cases, in many cases, maybe public funding is being at the end spent in overbuilding. I mean, building twice things in where was already done. And also, in some countries, like I heard from Sweden yesterday, I think in the workshops I heard that someone else also mentioned it, I think Arjuna in the UK, that the incumbents are using the networks in commons. In some, Sweden was in particular one of the examples, and so on. And they do in a voluntary basis. So if they do in a voluntary basis, there is no need for this criteria. They are already doing that. That's done. They never got exhausted of space on whatever. Problems are the countries where this is not happening. That unfortunately, there is more countries which is not happening in a voluntary basis. Then the regulator, what has to do is, okay, I'm going to force the incumbent to resell the infrastructure. From a legal perspective, it might look a solution, because also it's a way that forces the sharing. But from an economic perspective, if you are not, we cannot be naive as think that, nobody is going to share something from an economic perspective if they don't do in a voluntary basis for, happily, let's say. So that's not going to work. There will be lots of troubles and inconvenience in the terms of application. But by doing something like that, then maybe to ensure that it's not happening, because at the end of the day, the run out of the space problem, what's happening is that there is a risk for a speculative practice in terms of taking all the space and so on, and blocking others, and these kind of nasty things that are happening. So by just introducing this, maybe the volunteer, which is the best regulation, something that is not forced by the regulator, will be much easier to happen. And that's for, in terms of the public. If I'm doing in that way, ensuring that always there is a shared access in equal terms for everybody, then maybe it will be much easier and much more efficient the usage of the public spaces, let's say. And that's it. Nothing else. So.
Thank you very much, Ramon. That was a very interesting presentation with an elegant solution to dedicate the public domain to the commons, and with some suggestions for public administrations. Now I am going to give the floor to the last presentation of this session with a case study presented by Frances Canalias. Frances is the director of the Consortium for the Environment and Public Health of Garroxa.
Hola, bon dia a tothom. Català va bé? Pels traductors? Sí? Sí? Molt bé, doncs ho faré en català, si no us sap greu. Bé, a mi m'han convidat a venir aquí, massa bé no sé on he anat, perquè jo vinc d'un altre sector de la galàxia. Si veieu el títol que tinc aquí és director del Consorci de Medi Ambient i Salut Pública, i us podeu preguntar què hi fa un Consorci de Medi Ambient i Salut Pública parlant de fibra òptica. Bueno, jo vinc d'una comarca que som una mica agosarats i ens dediquem a el que sigui, no tenim massa problema. Us explico una mica la història des del començament. Nosaltres vam començar fa un parell d'anys interessant-nos per la fibra òptica perquè les empreses del nostre territori, poseu-vos una mica en context, la Garrotxa és una comarca de muntanya, una de les 11 comarques de muntanya de Catalunya, que té una singularitat especial, i és que té 50.000 persones visquent-hi, 56.000 persones visquent-hi, quan la resta de comarques de muntanya no arriben a 20.000 o justegen les 20.000 persones. A què es deu que nosaltres tinguem tantes més persones visquent? Que som una comarca bàsicament industrial, i per tant tenim una potència industrial entesa en el marc de la muntanya, diguem, interessant. Això fa que siguem més gent i això fa que la nostra indústria tingui una tradició llarga. Doncs bé, deia, fa un parell d'anys la nostra indústria apretava perquè poguessin tenir accés a les telecomunicacions i a la banda ampla i a la fibra òptica i a totes les meravelles que la tècnica ens va portant. Ho vàrem intentar fa 2 anys, vam intentar començar a fer un desplegament de fibra òptica. Quan parlava l'Olga jo m'anaven recordant que nosaltres al principi ho veiem molt fàcil i dèiem, bueno, escolta'm, què falta, la fibra òptica? Posarem fibra òptica, cap problema. Què ens ha de limitar? Res. Comencem a llegir la llei de telecomunicacions i veiem que això és una cosa extraordinàriament difícil, complicada, i que està fora del nostre abast. I en aquell moment ens vàrem cansar, nosaltres ens vàrem cansar i va semblar que tot s'arreglava perquè l'operador dominant venia i ens solucionava el problema. Però l'operador dominant va venir i ens va solucionar el problema de la ciutat d'Olot, 33.000 habitants, i res més. I ens va deixar penjats el reste de territori com si el reste de territori no hi fos. 20 i pico mil habitants, però tota la nostra indústria, perquè estan polígons industrials que estan fora de la ciutat d'Olot. Quan parlem amb l'operador, el que ens diu és dir, és que a mi aquest tipus de negoci m'interessa relativament poc i per tant el nivell d'inversió que haig de fer no té recuperació possible. Parlem amb altres operadors, amb operadors locals que començaven a sortir amb antenes i amb sistemes de ràdio, ens diuen que els interessa poder entrar en aquest negoci però que no tenen musculatura financera. I aquí ens quedem fa 2 anys. Fa poc, fa 4 o 5 mesos o 6 mesos, tornem a demanda del Consell d'Alcaldes, perquè també s'ha de posar en evidència això, a demanda del Consell d'Alcaldes de la comarca, tornem a parlar de fibra òptica i se'n fa un encàrrec directe, o se'ns fan el sigma, un encàrrec directe, que és, feu-ho com vulgueu, desplegueu una xarxa de cobertura universal per tota la comarca que garanteixi la competència entre operadors, que asseguri l'estabilitat i les velocitats del sistema i que tingui un preu justos. I dius, gràcies, senyors alcaldes. Gràcies per l'encàrrec, perquè és fàcil, ho solucionarem això amb un plis-plas. Amb aquest encàrrec nosaltres ens posem a treballar i tornem a constatar el que ja havíem vist, que les grans companyies no volen, que les petites no tenen musculatura i que ens havíem d'inventar alguna cosa. I el que ens inventem és dir, bueno, podem agafar les operadores petites, assentar-nos amb elles, assentar-nos a través de la Fundació Guifinet, que ja hi havíem tingut tractes en aquell primer inici, intentar desplegar una xarxa de comuns amb la idea de que això fomenta la col·laboració i la competència entre operadors. Comencem a donar-li voltes al sistema i veiem que l'únic inconvenient, o els dos únics inconvenients que tenim per poder fer això, és que hem de buscar una manera d'anar d'un poble a l'altre, perquè un cop arribem a cada un dels nuclis, a dintre els operadors ja s'espavilen, utilitzant les xarxes públiques del que sigui, ja s'espavilen, i l'altre problema que tenim és un problema de finançament, que és el que m'imagino que més d'un que ja ha pensat en això té. Amb el que fem el problema de finançament és posar-nos a treballar i fer allò que penso que sabem fer, que és intentar unir esforços perquè aquest problema de finançament deixi de ser un problema. I per tant parlem amb l'administració local per un costat i amb l'empresariat local per l'altre costat. I arribem a una situació que és la que hem començat, en la qual sobre un projecte del voltant de 580.000 euros, que és el que necessitem per fer el desplegament de la xarxa troncal, acabem tinguent aquests 580.000 euros més o menys assegurats per poder fer el desplegament. Com ho hem fet? Ho hem fet assegurant a tots els nostres ajuntaments que el que estàvem fent eren aportacions d'inversió a una línia de fibra òptica i assegurant a les nostres empreses que el que estàvem fent era ajudar a la velocitat de desplegament de la xarxa, convencent els nostres empresaris que allò que val d'entrada 1.200, 1.300, 1.500 euros, que és el dret de connexió, en lloc d'això ens han de donar 3.000 o ens han de donar 5.000 euros i que els seran retornats en el moment en què tinguem prou usuaris de la xarxa. És fàcil? No. És possible? Jo diria que sí, o jo dic que sí, vaja. Estem parlant d'unes necessitats, ja us he dit, de 580.000 euros, amb unes necessitats de negoci, diguem, per poder fer els retorns que ens comprometem a fer del voltant de 3 milions d'euros d'inversió i amb la necessitat d'aconseguir tenir uns 2.000 clients al cap de 4 o 5 anys. És possible tenir 2.000 clients? El que hem vist és que nosaltres tenim capacitat en aquests nuclis que anem connectant de tenir al voltant de 6.000 o ja 6.000 usuaris possibles, més les empreses, o sigui, uns 6.500, 6.700 clients. Per tant, vol dir que haurem de pedalar a aconseguir un nivell de penetració d'un 30% del mercat. I aquesta és la nostra experiència, no hi puc afegir gaire res més, estem llançats en aquesta pel·lícula, hem fet un parell de pobles, anem a un altre i anem fent. I això és el que hi ha.
Thank you very much for sharing this very interesting experience and all the implementation and negotiation details with us. You can stay if you don't mind, because I'm going to invite all the speakers of the session to sit together and participate to a public discussion. So we had the point of view of the community networks, of the public administration, of the public domain and the commons, and a concrete case study of implementing the commons. And I'm now going to open the floor to questions, comments, discussion. Yes, Leonardo, Marco. Briefly introduce yourself, please, for the recording.
Hi, I'm Leonardo Maccari. I'm working in the Net Commons project. I'm a researcher from University of Trent. Is this on? Yes. Okay. I think from the previous panel, something that was, I think, more or less agreed, even if not stated explicitly, is that the market itself is not really working really well. But one of the things that also emerged is that if you want to impose to provide or to try some different models, there are a lot of difficulties, mainly due to complexity of things, licensing, access, and these kind of things. But here, what Ramon in particular showed us is that probably what the public administration can do is to help to develop a model in which these difficulties are easier to overcome for any of the initiative like GIFI that wants to access this kind of infrastructure. Because in the end, if the public administration doesn't do nothing to facilitate this process, which is complex, what they're doing, it's basically sticking with the model that we have, which many people agree that it's not what we want. So my question was if, from the public administration specifically, there is this interest in facilitating this process. So as we have seen, it's a complex set of rules that allow other people to access the infrastructure, but can it be facilitated by the public administration with some kind of easy or, let's say, simplified interface so that initiatives that are not commercial and they do not have like a set of hired lawyers that know how to deal with this, they can enter into this big picture.
The question was for Olga.
Sí. ¿Se oye? Sí. A ver, he entendido que el papel de las administraciones públicas, cómo pueden ayudar a facilitar los comunes sin toda esta burocracia, más o menos. Es una buena pregunta. A ver, el problema viene dado porque ya desde las directivas europeas lo que se trata es de preservar la libre competencia y que con dinero público, digamos, no se distorsione la competencia. Y por lo tanto, que con un dinero público una administración pública no haga una actuación que aquí en este auditorio o en otros nos puede parecer genial, que es pues precisamente lograr que los ciudadanos tengan un acceso a Internet gratuito o barato o lo que sea, pero aquí la regulación lo que dice es, tú con esto no lo estás haciendo con unos fondos, estás haciéndolo con fondos públicos y por lo tanto estos fondos públicos estás distorsionando la competencia. ¿Por qué? Porque un operador privado no goza de este privilegio, entre comillas. Por eso cuando dicen que una administración pública ha de actuar sometida al principio del inversor privado, lo que te están diciendo es tú has de hacer lo mismo que haría un inversor privado con su dinero. No por el hecho de que tú utilices fondos públicos, realices determinadas actuaciones que estás perjudicando a un operador privado. Yo todo esto lo digo, no con el... me explico, ¿no? Por lo tanto, ¿qué puede hacer una administración pública? Pues dar una ayuda pública en dinero, ¿no? Pues mira, una subvención para que en mi territorio pues haya un despliegue tal o para que una empresa determinada cual. Se puede hacer, pero ¿qué ocurre? Que ha de pasar unos filtros, ha de pasar un informe en primer lugar de la Secretaría de Estado del Ministerio de Industria, si supera los 200.000 euros en 3 periodos, en 3 ejercicios económicos, también el de la Comisión Europea, la Dirección General de Competencia de la Comisión Europea. Por lo tanto, todo este tema, al final, empezó con algo tan simple como el tema de los wifis. En el año 2007 hubo una eclosión de los wifis que todas las administraciones públicas decíamos, pues con una inversión muy limitada, porque poner unas redes wifis pues es económicamente muy sostenible, puedo lograr que mis ciudadanos tengan acceso a Internet. Y aquí es cuando nos vinieron los reguladores y nos dijeron, no, porque tú con estos dineros públicos estás perjudicando al operador privado que no puede hacer lo mismo. Bueno, la modulación en la regulación la encontramos cuando nos dicen que hay en determinados casos en los que no hace falta respetar este principio porque se ha estudiado que no afecta a la competencia, pero son los supuestos que os he definido que son ridículos, ¿no? Pues es el acceso a Internet limitado a 200, con tecnología Wi-Fi limitada a 255K, etcétera. Lo mismo ocurre a la hora de construir, digamos, la infraestructura. La administración pública puede, no puede decir, bueno, pues yo construyo una red de fibra óptica y con fondos públicos y después que vengan los operadores a dar un servicio. Bueno, se considera que puede haber una ayuda pública, puede hacerlo, pero con sujeción al principio del inversor privado. O cuando se desarrolle reglamentariamente la ley que prevé que en supuestos en los que no hay un fallo de mercado podrá hacerlo con las condiciones que en aquel momento se nos determinen. ¿Me he explicado?
Si me permites, le ponemos un poco de imaginación al tema. Es que si nos quedamos, lo que dice Olga, que es verdad, seguro, no voy a discutir con la responsable jurídica, o sea, si no hacemos nada, la competencia es una cosa inexistente. Tal como estamos y tal como vivimos, sin imaginarnos algo más, no avanzamos. Entonces, es verdad lo que dice Olga, no podemos dar subvenciones desde la Administración porque esto se entiende como un efecto sobre la competencia y por lo tanto...
Bueno, se puede, pero nos han de decir desde si son compatibles o no con el mercado.
Sí. Nosotros hemos intentado darle la vuelta, como he intentado explicar. Hemos intentado darle la vuelta a esta historia saliendo del paradigma de decir que estamos dando subvenciones. ¿Qué estamos haciendo? Estamos haciendo una inversión. La Administración paga los derechos de conexión como cualquier otro usuario de esta red al precio que toca y el resto se le devuelve sistemáticamente al ir adquiriendo nuevos usuarios de la red. Y eso es lo que se nos ha ocurrido a nosotros para poder superar este sistema. O sea, el problema en el fondo no es un problema de estabilidad o de necesidad de disponer de dinero porque el proyecto no es rentable, sino que el problema es un problema financiero, es un problema de disponer del dinero en el momento de la arrancada, porque después el sistema tiene que autosostenerse.
Sí, pero en este sentido, bueno, me estáis demostrando que os actuáis sometidos al principio del inversor privado y por lo tanto es esto la ley lo prevé, o sea, la ley tiene muchos defectos, pero bueno, es decir, vuestro proyecto es un proyecto en el que una administración pública hace una inversión que tiene un retorno y por lo tanto tendría que presentar al regulador su plan de negocio y demostrar que esto en X años pues está amortizado. Esto supone actuar sujeto al principio del inversor privado, no tiene problema.
And following this, thanks for opening this question, because actually we are going to the core of the discussion. So the magic is, first of all, we have to understand that has to be clear, and I think that everybody agrees, that there is market failures everywhere in Europe and in telecommunications. So it's supposedly it has to be managed in a market basis, but in many cases and in many territories it is failing, and there is no really. That's why they are in the European Agenda 2020, and actually that's a big challenge, because the market is not perfect in telecommunication. If it was perfect, there is no need for regulators at all. So that's a fact. So recognizing that fact, if we don't do nothing, will not be solved. That's why the European Commission is asking us to take action on that. So we have to do something, because but just keeping the things in the way they are will not get solved. And that's what, for instance, Francesca is trying. And what Olga is saying. Then we have to, so it's allowed, I mean, for the public administrations to act. Actually, they are called to action, but we have to follow certain principles. And actually is what we were trying, that's in the public space usage is one of the suggestions that I was trying to explain. So as long as we are following this logic, that is not everybody has access without being forced, and actually this is also fine for us, because it's what also Roger was saying in his panel. I mean, we are not asking for a privilege in the commons, but we are asking for the same privilege that the others already have. And you know, there are incumbents already occupying the public spaces and so on. So let us have some of the space for that. And maybe we will solve in the same way many other things which are speculation for space, scarcity, and so on. So that's it. So very good. Because if we don't do nothing, nothing will happen.
Thank you very much. There was a question, Marco, or the other way around.
Thank you for the presentation. I would encourage to try to move the framework, not to say we don't want to be privileged, but to say we should be privileged. No, really, like to make that fight in the sense of to also provide indicators about why this system has it might be more efficient, might have a better environmental impact, or might have other social elements involved, and also put the light about why this system is better than other private models, and I think we should do that. I find very, and it's very perverse this dynamic in which public administration, that is the one who should take care of the general interest, are being asked to act as a private actor in order to be able to inject. That's a very, very perverse. I don't think we need to argue a lot regarding this. So, and in this, I would like to point about how to confrontate that situation, and I think perhaps because in the program is mainly about community networks, but this same problem is present in other areas, also in the radio spectrum. It's the same kind of problematic in which the request is to have also a third piece of the spectrum also for civil society uses. Like this kind of problematic is in many other areas. And I think it would be good that you don't only think and create forums like this one in which community networks try to dialogue directly alone with the public administration, but also we try to create solidarity and coordination between the several sectors in which we have the same problematic, that the commons is not being respected, and so create a commons front with the different sectors. And this is something that actually we have been doing in Barcelona with the ProCommons network that WeFinet is part. So I would encourage that we also have, like in forums like today, we also have a space for reflecting about how the community networks can build with other sectors with similar commons enclosement problematic, just how to together dialogue with the administration and push for solutions. And then I want to make a question regarding the possibilities of the public administration, because my sense is that where is the public compra pública as an option? How can I say compra pública in English? Like, where is the? Because you have said you should ask as a public actor. You can say you can invest. Public administration can invest, but there is also all the public
public spending. You know,
public spending can benefit. Because you can make the social clauses in order to define the investment of the public administration. And another element that has not emerged, which is very much present into the debate about the regulation of collaborative economy more broadly, is the element of open data as an element of quality of this model into contraposition to the other, in a context in which we have great problems of tax avoidance, or many problems of bad and corrupted activities in the private sector. how like the open data might, and the forcing of open data in to the operators in order to have a better functioning.
Many, you talked about many questions, and all of them very interesting. One thing is about, you asked why commons, let's say, production systems could not be privileged since they have many positive benefits. And we had internally this discussion many times. And given the framework, actually, because maybe we are not that ambitious because of the legal framework, not ask for privileges, but to give you an analogy, because you're one, and there is no equality of gender, of sex, let's say. Women are not paid as the men are in the labor markets. And then many regulations could happen because of that. One of them is give equal opportunities to all, is actually the legal framework what is saying in telecommunications. But you can go further and specify quotas or positive discriminations. So if you ask me, it makes sense, for sure it makes sense. In Korea, the telecoms operator, to facilitate, and they say that publicly, to facilitate competition, what they do is when they rule out any regulation, they say, we are doing in favor of the small ones, because that empowers competition, is a positive discrimination. Here, because of the framework in Europe, is a kind of, maybe we are not that ambitious, and that could be another approach, to be much more, let's say, effective. Another thing that you're saying, and actually there's a sign of negative discrimination. If we take, 5 years from now, all the public spending being in public, and if you say how much money we got, for instance, for building networks as in commons, and how much was invested in other options. So it's not a matter of having, positive discrimination. Actually, the discrimination is negative. Quite often, the public, when a public contract gets big, typically is written in a way that is blocked for us to access it, because it's forcing the business model. So actually what's happening is in the other way. We're not going to court, but that's the reality, and we have to recognize that. And thirdly, about open data, it is important. Supposedly it's being enforced by the European Union, all the public assets has to be, and it's very, there is lots of pending things to do from the administration. I know that you all are aware of that, because having public inventories, for instance, in Luxembourg, a month ago, I was seeing that Portugal did, a very nice approach in publishing all the infrastructure, roads, and whatever attached infrastructure are there. But here in Spain, it's still very much a secret. But hopefully, having to implement the European regulations on that, I hope that within it has happened several times during these panels. So is this pending because of applying European regulations? I don't know if it's because of the paralysis that is happening in the public sector last years in Spain. But some point of time, the open data in telecommunications and telecommunication infrastructure should happen in Spain if we are not out of Europe, because we are not actually following those obligations yet. But sometimes, hopefully, will happen. More